Good evening and welcome to the 2021 syracuse.com mayoral debate. I'm Chris Baker, an editor at syracuse.com and the Post-Standard. I'm joined tonight by the three people running to be the next mayor of Syracuse: Democrat Khalid Bey, Republican Janet Burman, and Independent candidate Ben Walsh, who is the incumbent. We'll spend the next hour or so probing the candidates' positions and opinions on a variety of topics affecting the city of Syracuse and our community at large. Tonight's debate is brought to you by syracuse.com and the Post-Standard in partnership with the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. We are streaming live tonight from the Dick Clark Studios at the Newhouse School, and we're delighted to be here. A note before we begin, we'd like viewers to know that all participants here are adhering to Syracuse University's public health policies for studio spaces. Those include wearing masks at all times when we're not on the air and keeping a safe distance. You'll notice we're all pretty far away from each other tonight. Also, while Syracuse University encourages the exchange of ideas, the university takes no partisan stance in this election. Any opinions expressed here tonight are those of the candidates and do not represent the university. A reminder that the election is Tuesday, November 2nd, and early voting starts this Saturday, October 23rd. We'll start tonight with opening statements from each of the three candidates. Janet Burman will go first. Janet?
Thank you to syracuse.com and the Syracuse Post-Standard, as well as the Newhouse School at Syracuse University for hosting this event for us. Interestingly, it was the university that brought my family here to Syracuse 31 years ago. My husband came here to be dean of the business school. We chose Syracuse after living in cities across the country and are pleased with our decision. We didn't expect to stay this long, but we are happy that we have. The reason I'm running for mayor is because I believe I have the experience and the know-how to effectively lead our city as we face some of the most significant challenges that it has ever faced. My background in industry, in government, and in charitable organizations has prepared me well for this role. I spent my first part of my career as an economist, working in information technology and also doing economic analysis, forecasting the impacts of government regulations and tax policy on markets. After I came to Syracuse, I had the opportunity to work for New York State as district administrator of the Workers' Compensation Board. During that time, we were tried and tested first by major transitions in the organization, going from paper-based to electronic processing. Then we had the World Trade Center attacks, which were the most significant workers' comp disaster in history, leading through that period and then preparing us for what might come in the future as far as disasters and crises was a valued part of my experience.
Thank you, candidate Burman. We're gonna stop you there. Democrat Khalid Bey, 90 seconds.
Thank you. I too would like to express my appreciation to syracuse.com, the Post-Standard, SI Newhouse School for hosting us in this event. It's always exciting. My name is Khalid Bey. As mentioned, I'm a Democratic candidate for mayor. Born and raised here in the city, native to the city, raised in public housing, single-parent household. My mother worked very hard to take care of me and my three other siblings. I graduated from public high school here in Corcoran High School. Great experience in our local schools. And I got elected, fortunately, in 2011 to the city council. I've been on the council 10 years now. I want to take an opportunity to point out what I always talk about is the most, I think, influential pieces of legislation that I've sponsored. I think it speaks to an understanding of what the demands are and what people want. The ban-the-box legislation that allowed people re-entering society to gain access to a preliminary interview and not be discriminated against based on their criminal history. Local hiring ordinance to ensure that people who live within our city gain access to employment opportunity. Warrants for inspection to hold absentee landlords accountable for maintaining or being negligent with deplorable condition in their living spaces. Disorderly property ordinance to target gambling and drug houses. These are everyday things that everyday people deal with. Concerns of public safety, which is paramount right now, are relative to that particular legislation. But what's more interesting, for all of those pieces of legislation I've mentioned, they are the prime issues that we're talking about here today, right now. I think it demonstrates my understanding of what our needs are, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bey. And Mayor Ben Walsh, the incumbent.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you to syracuse.com for hosting this debate. You know, when I ran for mayor 4 years ago, I ran by promising to set aside the partisanship and divisiveness that for far too long had held our community back. And I'm proud to say that we've kept that promise. And because of that, our city is better off. Despite a global pandemic, we are growing as a city for the first time in nearly 70 years. Under my leadership, we have addressed some of the most intractable challenges facing our community. We have a new municipal sidewalk program. We have police residency for our new police officers. We are increasing the number of roads paved. We have a new smart streetlight network. Our city high school graduation rate is going up, and our poverty rate and vacant housing are going down. And we're building new housing in the city of Syracuse. Like other cities, we are struggling with violent crime. While overall crime is down 6% during the time I've been in office, violent crime has been up. And that is something that we are all painfully aware of and something that I work extremely hard on every day. There's still so much more that we need to do. We have made significant progress, but I believe if we continue to work together, and I have 4 more years in office, we're going to continue that progress and we're going to keep Syracuse rising.
All right. Thank you all. We'll move on to the question and answer portion of the debate. Candidates will have 60 seconds to respond to each question, followed by rebuttals and follow-ups at the moderator's discretion. Our first question goes to Mayor Walsh, and it's about policing in Syracuse. A recent report from syracuse.com showed 2 Syracuse police investigators lied during an interrogation in order to get a false murder confession out of a drunk man. The man spent 8 months in jail before a witness told prosecutors they had the wrong man. Do you believe it's okay for police to use those kind of tactics during questioning? And what should happen with those 2 investigators?
So, Chris, I've had this conversation with Chief Buckner, and anyone who has spent any amount of time in prison for something that they didn't do, it's inexcusable, and my heart goes out to that gentleman. While I understand that what those officers did was not technically illegal or not allowed, I'd like to think that we can do better as a police department. And that's what I look for throughout our police department on every issue. You know, oftentimes people talk about either doing police reform or focusing on public safety. We have and must do both. We need to make sure that our community is safe, but we also need to hold our department and our officers to a very high standard, which is why I focus so much on police reform. I'm going to continue to do that, and I'm going to continue to make sure that everyone feels that they have a police department that's working in their best interests.
Councilor Bey, we'll go to you, same question.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate when you hear or you read about this kind of circumstance where a person may have been wrongfully detained. You know, it certainly, I think, struck a chord with many throughout the city when we talk about receiving the type of service and protection from police officers that we expect to get. Certainly, bad actors who willfully make those kind of decisions have to be held accountable. We understand that investigations are necessary to determine what in fact is true. In the Bey administration, that kind of action taken by officers would not be tolerated. Again, I want to reiterate that we have to be responsible. The police have to equally be responsible in their duty. You know, us as elected officials, I always say if we breathe wrong, it may be a headline in the newspaper. I remember talking with the former PBA president, Jeff Piedmont, when I said, you know, the police are held to the same standard as the rest of us. If we can't breathe wrong, nobody can breathe wrong. We're all held accountable to the same rules and the same penalties.
Thank you, Councilor Bey. And Janet Burman, same question.
I think it's critical that we enable anyone who is stopped for questioning, detained, considered a suspect in a crime, that they receive their full civil rights in the course of the investigation. The Supreme Court has ruled that lying on behalf of the police is an acceptable activity. It's not something I've ever been comfortable with, but we're dealing with significant challenges in how we investigate and determine guilt and determine whether someone should be held over for further investigation. So while I would discourage that type of practice, I recognize that there are times when those types of tactics are necessary.
And just a quick follow-up for all 3 of you. I would just like to know, do you think those 2 investigators should be disciplined and or fired? Mayor Walsh, with you first.
So I have had this discussion with Chief Buckner. To this point, Chief Buckner has not shared any information with me that would suggest that, that discipline is necessary. So unless that changes, I'm comfortable with how the chief has handled the situation.
Councilor Bey?
I would argue that if the investigation proves to be true, that of course they would have to be disciplined and or fired.
And Candidate Burman?
No, I would not discipline them. They were acting within the law and within the purview of what investigators are allowed to do in working on solving crimes.
All right, thank you all. We will move on to another question about policing, and I want to look at police profiling in another report that recently came out on syracuse.com. Data released by the police department under the Right to Know law shows that police stopped black people 7 times more often than white people, but were more likely to make an arrest if pulling over someone who was white. Experts say that shows that there's a lower threshold used when deciding to pull over somebody who is black versus somebody who is white. Is there a policy you would enact, remove, or strengthen in order to address this, or is the current model working to your satisfaction? And Councilor Bey, we'll start with you on this question.
This is where training is very important. I think this is where cultural understanding and the like is very important, but also fairness is important. Obviously, the current policy is not working. That is a very discouraging policy. While we understand the arguments that was made by the chief, which has some validity, right? If you have an area where there are the majority of let's say, shots fired, and the likelihood is that some people in those areas could be considered targets to be pulled over if they're assumed to be involved in that activity. The problem is too many innocent people get caught up in the fray and are unfortunately either charged with some smaller violations and the like because of what I think is an overaggression in those same neighborhoods. So we need a lot more training, a lot more responsibility, a lot more accountability on the part of our officers to make sure that if we're going after bad actors, we're hitting the mark and we're not, unfortunately, putting innocent people in bad positions.
Thank you. Candidate Burman.
I think we're at greater risk of profiling when we don't have the full complement of resources available to do the job of policing in our community. I believe that a different model of policing must take place, that we need to have patrol officers assigned on a consistent basis in specific neighborhoods. And we need to encourage a greater understanding and trust building between the police and the community. Oftentimes you'll see police pulling people over because they don't have adequate information in terms of tips or leads provided to them from the community. We need to change the culture so that people feel comfortable providing tips and leads, and that we can rely less on these types of stops.
And Mayor Walsh.
Well, we all know that violent crime often disproportionately impacts communities of color, and unfortunately that results oftentimes in officers spending more time in neighborhoods of color. The important thing is that we have transparency and data so we can see what's happening. The reason we had this information is because my administration worked with the Common Council to enact the Right to Know law, which produced this information for us to look at. And it was hard to look at, but it starts with being transparent and sharing information. Then from there, it goes on to training. And we are currently, for the first time in the department's history, conducting cultural competency training for all of our officers in the department. And that's to make sure that, again, not only they have cultural competency, but they're aware of any potential implicit bias that they have that may not that may not be intentional, but may be resulting in some of the things that we're seeing here on paper. The final piece is that this is why having more officers live in the city of Syracuse is so important. If we have officers that are living in the city, that are more familiar with the communities that they're serving, more likely they're going to be more efficient and effective in the way they do their work, which again is why I worked so hard to get residency into the police contract, and starting with our new class, which will begin in January, we'll have city residents in our police academy.
Thank you all. Just again, a quick follow-up on this, and Khalid, we'll start with you and go down the line. Speaking of residency, there will be another police contract up for negotiation, likely on the next mayor's watch. Would you keep the residency requirement in those negotiations, or would you try to achieve residency in some other way?
I would do both. I would certainly negotiate for a greater stay on the part of police officers beyond 5 years. but certainly you cannot discredit the effort to get new hires in the city. As the mayor mentioned, it was an effort of both the mayor and the council to do as much. We succeeded in that respect, but it is still my position that we need an adjustment to the New York State Taylor law to take to remove the reins from upstate cities so we can improve ourselves financially, but also have greater protections within our streets with police residency.
Candidate Burman.
I would prefer to recruit from within the city than to require police hired from outside of the city to live in the city. I'm concerned that we may face a hiring disadvantage in the near term because serving as a police officer in the city of Syracuse right now is not generally considered a respectable position, and the city is not considered a safe place. I've had police officers express to me concerns about their families being in the city, about retaliation that may occur by living in the city. I have the philosophy that let's make the city a place people choose to live and want to live.
Thank you. And Mayor Walsh.
So, I am very much in agreement with Councilor Bey that we need, ideally, should address this at the state level through changes in the Taylor law. But in lieu of that, we had the contract. And while my administration negotiated a contract that included residency, Councilor Bey did not support that contract. He voted against it. And we heard from candidate Burman that she does not support residency for our officers. So going into the next contract, we expect to keep that in place. We'll continue to make sure that we're negotiating a contract that's fair for our citizens and for our police officers, as we also continue to invest in other things like our police cadet program at Fowler, like our police athletic league program that will help us to encourage more
Mayor
people
Walsh.
in the city to become police officers.
Councilor Bey, just 15 seconds if you'd like to respond to why you voted against that.
I would, and I think everyone in here who's been in the chamber knows that the concern relative to the police contract was at first the presentation relative to cost was that it would be a $12.5 million bill to the city, to the taxpayer. We learned through further research and understanding that the bill was actually $19.5 million. That particular misdirection is the reason why the majority of the council voted no against the police contract. While we support residency, we couldn't sacrifice or throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Thank you. And Candidate Burman, if you'd like 15 seconds just to respond to that as well.
Well, to state that I oppose residency is a little bit inaccurate. I oppose mandating residency for new police officers. I want to concentrate on recruiting people from within the community to serve our community. And I think that is the best way to achieve residency, understanding, and trust.
Thank you. All right, on a related topic, and we will start with you, Candidate Burman, on this question. I'd like to talk about crime and safety in the city. It's one of the top concerns of voters and a frequent theme in this election. The last 2 years have been especially violent in Syracuse and around the country. All three of you have said that public safety would be a top priority in your administration. Mayor Walsh, you've said there's still a lot of work to be done regarding public safety. What is one specific thing that the next mayor needs to change in the next 4 years in order to make people feel more safe in Syracuse? Candidate Burman.
I contend that the current mayor has not made public safety his first priority. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that during the COVID pandemic, substantial cuts were made to the police and fire budgets under the guise that we needed cutbacks for COVID. Cutbacks could have been made in other departments. We could have drawn more from the reserve fund, and the fact that that was not considered shows that public safety wasn't a priority. The fact that we had the highest homicide rate tied on record last year demonstrates the failure of that policy.
Thank you. Mayor Walsh.
So that, just to be clear, that the funding cuts that were made across every department proportionally based on the fiscal crisis that we were in. That's what leaders are required to do, and that's what we did. And as soon as we had an opportunity to reinstate that funding, we did so. We have made significant investments in public safety from the beginning. I've authorized 4 police academy classes in 4 years. We have a 5th ready to start at the beginning of next year. We have fully deployed body-worn cameras throughout the entire uniform patrol division. I mentioned we've started programs to address some of the underlying conditions of violence, a police athletic league program, a summer youth employment program to make sure that kids have positive things to do. We've established a new gun violence suppression detail to go out proactively and to get guns off the streets. We've invested in more cameras on our street surveillance cameras and ShotSpotter to make sure that we have the tools to catch the perpetrators of violent crime. That's where we need to continue to focus our effort. We need to expand those efforts. I want to do more and work with the county and other partners to address mental health conditions that are often underlying in many of these situations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Councilor Bey.
Yes, the most immediate thing that I think we can do is put officers on the beat. You know, I can make the argument consistently that proximity matters. I don't believe there's a debate that could be made to contradict that. There's no person, certainly not a person who's alert and aware that would commit a crime with a police officer standing there or in close proximity. Yeah, we have a number of mental health issues. I refer back early on to a concern I expressed when I first got elected about the recreational use of embalming fluid and the fact that it would create 5 years into the future many issues with young people with dissociation. Those are some of the very things we're dealing with now. So we certainly have some mental health issues, but every issue is not related to mental health. We have to put officers in the neighborhoods, close proximity, improve communication between police and community, and that's how you start to chip away at the issue.
And just another quick follow-up. We have somewhere less than 400 police officers on the street right now, I believe, or not necessarily on the street, but in the department. Is there a number that you would target as mayor for the next 4 years that you would like to see? We need X amount of police officers. Janet Burman, I'll start with you.
Yeah, as far as police officers available to patrol in the city, we are desperately short of them. There's some nights recently when there have been only 16 police officers available to patrol the entire city. You know, albeit the proportional cuts, if you view public safety as the paramount first priority of government, then you don't make a proportional cut to public safety. We need 300 officers on the streets available to patrol in the neighborhoods in a neighborhood-based manner, similar to what Councilor Bey is advocating for. And I've said that all along. I understand there's a big recruitment challenge we have to face in order to meet those ranks, but I think that, first of all, respect on the part of the administration for the role that police officers do on a consistent basis is necessary to help improve recruitment.
Thank you. Mayor Walsh, is there a number that we need to be at as far as police officers?
So I mentioned we have had 4 police academy classes in 4 years. No one can remember a time when we had that many in that short a period of time, and we have another one funded. But the reality is that has not been able to keep pace with the resignations and the retirements in the department. I've gone out of my way to try to make sure every officer I run into knows how much I appreciate the very difficult job that they do. But it's a very difficult time in the industry, and it's a transitional time. So we need to continue to make sure that we're getting officers in the department that know what they're signing up for. And ultimately, the number of funded positions we have right now is 426. My goal is to get to that number. Right now, we're right around 380. We need to get to that number, and then we need to evaluate. At that point, we may decide that that's enough. We all agree that what we have right now is not enough. And again, walking beats are a great idea, and I would love to do them, but I haven't heard any plan from my 2 opponents as to how you get there from where we are today.
Thank you, Mayor Walsh. And Councilor Bey, a number.
Yeah, you know, I certainly am a supporter of us filling our police department to capacity. Full 426, the council has always been support of holding more police classes even prior to this administration. But in addition, we could also reconfigure the deployment of our resources. You know, we can look to put more officers on the street in a given shift, which is very important, and making sure that we're having an adequate number of officers in our respective neighborhoods. I also mentioned, to the point of the police contract, you know, one of the things that many of my members on the council, colleagues on the council, including police officers, believe is that the contract as it stands is not fiscally sustainable in the near future. And the very thing that people fear, the reduction of police officers, could be the result of the contract that the mayor had negotiated and the arbitration that we ultimately had succumbed to. I think it's very important that we understand. I agree with the deliberate effort to hire residents. Residents are obviously committed to the area, but these are the things that I think we need to do to effectively fill out our police department so that we can receive adequate service.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Walsh, 15 seconds to respond, just because he mentioned your contract there.
Also within that contract that Councilor Bey voted against was a longevity incentive to help retain officers. If Councilor Bey voted for that 2 years ago, we very well may be in a different position. And worse than not voting for it, when I asked him for specific suggestions as to what would make that contract palatable, he offered nothing.
Yeah, that's not true.
All right, let's move on to a question about city staff. One of the mayor's most important tasks is going to be identifying and hiring key staffers to run the city. Who would be the first person you hire into an administration? And for Mayor Walsh, if re-elected, do you expect to bring back the same team you have now or some new people? And I think, Mayor Walsh, we will start with you.
Sure. I am blessed to have an incredible team at City Hall. We have assembled the most diverse, the most dynamic city staff in the history of city government. One of the first hires I made was Deputy Mayor Sharon Owens, who's been a fearless leader in city government. We spent a year engaging with the community, having community meetings that helped inform our decision to hire Chief Buckner. And we have so many other exceptional, not just department heads, but right on down through departments. So my goal will be, if I'm reelected, to reevaluate the staffing situation. I'm guessing some people may be ready to move on. Hopefully we'll be able to keep the team together and continue to make the progress we've been making.
Thank you, Councilor Bey.
Well, I can name 3 positions that I would fill right away: Chief of Staff, Police Chief, and Corporation Counsel.
Can you name who you would fill them with?
Still working on that.
All right, Janet Burman.
I'm going to hire department heads who believe in my style of leadership, which is to set clear goals for those who report to you, and then give them the technology and other resources that they need to achieve those goals. Clear communication. I want measurable, objective goals for each department, not relying upon improvement in general, but actual specific improvements. And I think the first place I would start is with Police Chief.
All right, thank you all. We're going to take I won't call it a break here, but we're going to move into a couple quick answer questions. We'll call it our lightning round. Just a minute, we're going to ask 7 or 8 questions. I'd ask each of you to give a one-word answer, or as close to one word as possible.
One word.
I'm saying that now because I know some of you will certainly break that rule. But we'll go down the line, starting with Councilor Bey. First question: who do you support for governor next year?
I support Kathy Hochul.
Lee Zeldin.
Support Governor Hochul for now, and we'll see if anybody else puts their hat in the ring, but I have a great relationship with her.
All right. Janet Burman, what's your favorite place to spend a free afternoon in the city of Syracuse?
Thorndon Park.
Mayor Walsh?
Anywhere with my family, going, taking the dog for a walk, being outdoors in our parks.
And Councilor Bey?
Walking at Kirk Park, or walking the track at Sunnycrest.
All right. Mayor Walsh, we'll start this one with you. In one word, describe your relationship with County Executive Ryan McMahon.
Strong.
Councilor Bey?
Respectable.
Respectful.
All right. Councilor Bey, back to you. Who's got the best chicken wings in Syracuse?
I wouldn't know. I eat the veggie chicken wings at Strong Hearts.
I'm not a chicken wing connoisseur.
Change of pace.
All right. Candidate Burman, this one we will start with you. Should Onondaga County, the Onondaga County Legislature, slow down on redistricting?
No.
Mayor
Yeah.
Walsh?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Bey?
Yes.
I think we are back to you, Mayor Walsh. Should the city put aside money to help bring back a jazz fest in downtown Syracuse?
We are setting aside money for cultural events to be determined on Jazz Fest.
Councilor Bey?
Yes.
Candidate Burman.
I want to help regain corporate sponsorship.
All right, back to you, Councilor Bey. What kind of candy will you give out on Halloween?
I try to give away things that don't cause cavities, but my kids will give away Twizzlers and M&Ms.
You're not raisins and apples, are you?
No, can't
right.
trust those two.
All right, Candidate Burman.
The candies that I don't like, we've got a mixed bag, and I'm picking out the ones that I like, and I'm eating them right now.
Mayor Walsh.
Anything Willy Wonka, that's my favorite, and that's what my neighbors deserve.
All right, we will leave those there and move back on to the somewhat wordier answers here. I believe this next question, we will start again with Mayor Walsh, and we're going to be talking about property tax assessment. The property tax system in Syracuse is badly out of whack. It puts an unfair burden on property owners in poor neighborhoods. It's been decades since the city undertook a holistic review of property taxes. Common Councilor Michael Green has lobbied for using federal stimulus money on a one-time reassessment to bring different neighborhoods into alignment. Will you pursue a citywide reassessment in the next 4 years? And please tell us why or why not, Mayor Walsh.
So, Chris, a citywide reassessment is on the table because that's really our only option right now to do a holistic reassessment of the city. But I'm not sure that it's the best option. It's an antiquated model. It requires our staff or consultants to go and physically evaluate each property. There's technology and software out there that other communities are using that's much more efficient, much more cost effective, and allows for more real-time reassessment. So you don't have to hit the reset button as soon as you're done the first time. So in the meantime, as we're exploring and piloting different strategies, using those new models and working with the state to change their requirements, I have pushed our assessment department to do more assessments so we can start to catch up, and we have made progress there, but we're going to continue to do more.
Thank you. Councilor Bey.
Yeah, I mentioned before that I think we have to study to understand more about what the unintended consequences could be. While we know that the report was accurate in its presentation, the intended assistance that would be provided to persons living in marginalized neighborhoods could actually do the opposite. And I made mention to the fact that many, through the SHARP grant over the years and other programs, have made improvement to their houses on the south side, near west side, near east side. And so their assessments will actually be driven up as a result, and we may put people in tighter positions financially. So I think it requires a greater understanding of what those intended consequences could be, what adjustments we can make to minimize those consequences, and then ultimately make a determination at that point.
Candidate Burman.
I think the problem with doing a citywide assessment is it would be done at tremendous expense, and it would be out of date within 2 years. And so we're left with the same problem of inequitable assessments across our community. I think we need to make it a more dynamic process, incorporating factors such as home sale prices into our model for assessment, and taking advantage of the community organizations that are out there to assist people right now in appealing their assessments. Appealing an assessment is a daunting task, and it's not one that the average person would relish undertaking, and certainly those of compromised financial means and limited time to devote to such a subject are not going to be in a position to do. So we have to facilitate rendering an equitable solution across the city by enlisting our neighborhood organizations in helping people who are currently at a disadvantage.
Thank you. Let's move on to a topic that's probably of interest across the county, and I believe we will start with Councilor Bey on this question. I'd like to talk about the aquarium. County Executive Ryan McMahon has proposed spending $85 million in county money on an aquarium at the Inner Harbor. His office estimates the attraction would generate $50 million a year in economic activity and kickstart development at the Inner Harbor. It would also take another parcel of private property off the city tax rolls. Is this a wise use of tax dollars? And as mayor, would you help make the project a reality, or would you push against it? Councilor Bey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I'm always for creating additional opportunity for employment. Even when we're talking about trying to improve or add to the dynamics of the character of the city to make it more attractive to draw people. Nevertheless, I'm never for removing perfectly performing taxable parcels off the tax rolls. I make that clear probably in every council session. In addition, I've made the argument, but I believe there's more we can do with the money. The council, appealed to the county to match us, to provide rent relief for persons who were legitimately unemployed and landlords who unfortunately didn't collect rents as a result, to help persons who may make 80% AMI, who don't qualify for some of the other programs, to help them so that we can stabilize our situations here, the homes and families here. The county was not interested. That's one example of what I think the money could be used for. I'll say real quick, let me know if I'm running out here.
You're
Chris.
running out here.
All right, so I'll be quick. We can use additional financial help with our land bank.
Thank you, Councilor Bey. Candidate Burman.
I'm always skeptical of a proposal that is to be undertaken by government that has already been rejected by private sector. The efficacy of building an aquarium in that vicinity was already evaluated by the Pyramid Corporation, and it was rejected. And I don't see any factors that have changed the economics of that development. I would prefer to see that money go to providing more improved capital within our city, whether it be in home grants, more money through the home bank. I think that would be a much better use of those funds.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Walsh.
So recently, we released our plan for how we would spend $123 million of federal pandemic relief money. And an aquarium was not included in that plan. Our priorities are investing in children, families, and neighborhoods, infrastructure, ensuring that the city is fiscally sustainable. But the county executive did come to me and propose spending $85 million on an aquarium in the city of Syracuse. And my feeling is that those are county funds that could be spent anywhere. He's proposing to invest them in the city, in an area where there is a lot of underperforming land that may technically be on the tax rolls, but is generating very little revenue or economic activity. And he has a study in place that is sound. It showed they evaluated multiple locations, that on the water, it was the best location for it. And I think that in addition to creating economic opportunity and jobs, it will be a force multiplier to enhance the uses and the viability of the land around it. So ultimately, will help to grow the tax base. So I welcome the investment. Again, we can invest in other areas while accepting that investment at the same time. I think the city will be better off for it.
Thank you, Mayor Walsh. Just a 30-second follow-up. As long as we're talking about the Inner Harbor, I think for as long as I can remember, there have been talks about developing the Inner Harbor, plans trying to develop the Inner Harbor, and it's never quite materialized. Over the next 4 years as mayor, what would you do to try to encourage more development or something to happen at the Inner Harbor, or do you think it needs to be done? Like I said, 30 seconds. Councilor Bey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I will revisit some of the ideas we discussed initially before CORE won the contract or won the award to do the development there. There was a number of other would-be developers who had ideas for how to build out those parcels there. All of them would be ultimately taxable. It would increase foot traffic, be economic drivers, not only in residential, but also in business. And so I would revisit those kind of discussions and try to bring some of those things back online.
Thank you. Candidate Burman.
I think whatever development we want to have take place, we need to consider carefully how we're going to integrate transportation to that development. Historically, that region has been served by Interstate 81. It no longer will be. Does that present more significant challenges for development? That's difficult to say, but that has to be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Walsh.
Yeah, so again, there's only so many market rate apartments and retail and restaurants that you can build without having to generate more demand. That's what the aquarium is going to do. And with that additional demand, I do see increased opportunity for business growth, but I also see a great opportunity to address our housing crisis. We need more quality, affordable housing in the city of Syracuse. We're building it in neighborhoods throughout the city, and I think we can build more in the Inner Harbor.
Thank you. That's a great segue into our next topic, which is housing. We will start with Janet Burman on this question. Quality affordable housing is very expensive to build, which limits the city's ability to develop new single-family homes and apartments. Besides new construction, what strategies can the mayor use to ensure that Syracuse families can find quality, affordable places to live? Janet Burman?
Well, I think it begins with improving our existing housing stock, which is in terrible conditions, as we know. It's riddled with lead, dangerous exposure for children, and it has inefficient heating and ventilation systems. So, to provide grants for city homeowners to make improvements in their housing stock so that we have green and healthy environments for them to live in, I think is the most effective way as compared with, new construction financed through the city.
And those grants from city funds or federal funds?
They're federal funds.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mayor Walsh.
So when you look at where we're spending our federal pandemic relief funding, we are spending a significant amount, over $20 million on housing. And that's not just new housing. We are building new single-family houses, affordable houses in the city. We are looking to build more affordable rental housing, but we're also setting aside money for stabilization of vacant existing properties, also home improvement funds. And to Councilor Bey's credit, we've worked very well together with the council to put that funding aside. So we're supporting homeowners, we're stabilizing existing vacant properties, and we're investing in new housing as well. And we're doing all of that right now.
Thank you. Councilor Bey.
Yeah, a lot of what I think was said by both my opponents is certainly a part of what we need to do or continue to do. We need to invest in our existing housing, whether we're talking 1 and 2 families or multi-unit dwellings. The value of warrants for inspection to ensure that landlords are improving the current conditions of some of the housing, an effective use of the Board of Administrative Adjudication to handle housing violations, I think, becomes a part of it. But certainly attracting more support from the state and the Fed, HUD funds. There's been an effort on the council for a long time to give more consideration to using CDBG funds for housing as intended. We know we have so many other services that are funded, and we don't want to neglect those services, but we certainly have often talked about working with the administration to try to get back to providing those funds for housing specifically and working with our housing partners, hopefully getting them to obtain a lot more of these dilapidated structures or struggling structures to bring them back up to code and ultimately improve the quality for our residents.
Thank you. We'll move on again. I'd like to ask a question about climate change and transportation. Mayor Walsh, we'll start with you on this one. With climate change looming, what steps, if any, should the mayor take to improve public transportation, e-biking, pedestrian-friendly streets, to limit the necessity for automobile use in the city? Or is Syracuse destined to always be a place where you're hampered if you don't have a car?
Absolutely not, Chris. We have made very intentional investments to make the city more accessible for people that don't have private vehicles. A quarter of our population, about 25%, doesn't have access to a private vehicle. So it's an imperative that we need to provide it for access, but it's also an imperative because of the climate crisis that we're facing. We've made investments in other areas to reduce greenhouse gases, converted all of our streetlights and other lighting to LED technology, but we've also just recently relaunched our bike share and scooter program. We're building out pedestrian and bike infrastructure throughout the city. And we are pushing Centro and working with our partners at Centro and the state level, as well as on the council, to finally establish a bus rapid transit system, which will really provide a viable public transportation option that we don't currently have in the community. And I think through all of those things, we will make the city more accessible, get people to jobs, get people to school, but also more sustainable, which is critical during this climate crisis.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Bey.
I think a key thing, anytime you're attempting to reduce something, you have to eliminate the need, or at least reduce the need. I think a great part of that is neighborhood revitalization. If a lot of the services that people would need is within walking distance on their neighborhood business corridors, we actively seek to attract the businesses that those neighborhood business corridors would support, and we would do a lot to reduce the need for people to travel. I always use an example that many people on the south side where I live drive all the way to Lowe's instead of going to True Value right in the valley. But I would much rather walk to Solana Street to go to a small hardware store. So I think that's one thing to improve walkability. Resurrecting our neighborhoods, our neighborhood business corridors is key. Promoting biking, I certainly am a proponent of that. You know, the efforts that we've made now, the administration and the council in general with bike share, things that we've all supported. None of us, I think, would say anything against it. Supporting efforts to bring in bus rapid transit is key for getting people to places that they otherwise couldn't get to and getting them there faster. But again, I want to reemphasize a purposeful effort to improve and attract business to neighborhood business corridors, bringing neighborhoods back, I think is key to reducing the need for vehicular traffic.
Thank you. And Candidate Burman.
Yes, I agree completely with Councilor Bey's point that if we were doing our job on neighborhood development, there would be a lot more opportunities for employment that is walkable commute, as well as day-to-day activities such as shopping. So that should be a key part of the strategy. We also need to look at new ways of transportation. We are looking at significant employment taking place and becoming a reality north of the city in Clay. Those jobs should be open to city residents as well as people from around the county. However, city residents are going to have the most difficult time getting to those jobs. Right now, the Amazon warehouse, in the future, hopefully the microchip manufacturing facility. In order to address the transportation needs there, I recommend that we go to a model that works very well in another major metropolitan area, and that's van pools that are funded by the employers and facilitate employees to travel the route of their neighbors and drive each other to work in a van pool.
Thank you. We're going to move on to a question about Interstate 81, and I believe, Kenneth Berman, I believe we'll start with you on this question. What do you need to start doing next year when the construction begins on the I-81 project? What needs to be done starting next year to mitigate the impact that I-81 construction is going to have on Syracuse residents and Syracuse's workers?
We need a comprehensive plan for housing that's going to be impacted along the construction route, providing alternate living conditions for people that don't want to be in the shadow of the construction and exposed to the dust and debris that's going to be kicked into the air by that taking place. We also need to look at alternate residential situation for people who not necessarily interested in going back to that after we're all said and done, because they will still be exposed to significant air pollution along the community grid. We need to adequately prepare for disruptions that could occur in delivery of emergency services. We need to consider expanding the facilities for the fire department on the east side of town so that we're not left vulnerable on the east side by the lack of availability of personnel and equipment that may be on the west side and unable to travel to the east side. That type of contingency planning, that type of thorough look, bringing everybody involved who will be impacted by this, getting their ideas, that is what I worked on at the Workers' Compensation Board.
Thank you. Mayor Walsh, same question on I-81 mitigation.
Yeah, many of the things that Candidate Berman mentioned are contained within our formal comments that we submitted on behalf of the city for the draft environmental impact statement. So we have been passionately advocating for the community grid, but also making sure that we maximize the community benefit. And there's a number of ways to do that. In addition to ensuring that city services are not disrupted, we need to make sure that local people are working on this project. That's why we brought together our 81 jobs big table process. That's why we established our Pathways to Apprenticeship program through our Syracuse Build initiative, where we are partnering with the trades, bringing people through a program that is then allowing them to go right into apprenticeships in trades of their choice. These are city residents with a specific focus on historically marginalized populations, communities of color, women, and veterans. We're doing that right now. We're also working with the state to submit an application for SEP 14, which will allow for a local hiring provision. It'll be the first one under the Biden administration. So we're leading from the front here. In addition to workforce, we need to make sure people have adequate housing too. That's why we launched our Blueprint 15 initiative in partnership with the Syracuse Housing Authority.
Thank you, Mayor
Uh,
but again,
Walsh.
we've been vocal and we're going to continue to push for the maximum benefit.
Thank you. And Councilor Bey.
Yeah, I think certainly one of the very important things is a reconfiguring of the traffic patterns. I think there's a number of things that have to happen, turning one ways to two ways and vice versa, to reduce the oncoming congestion that many will experience as a result of the viaduct being removed. While we know that all of the traffic won't come into the city, certainly a large amount of it would. Work with our housing partners on relocation efforts. Some of that is going on now, but I think we have to ramp up that effort to ensure that we have living spaces in place, get a better understanding of what the housing authority has vacant now. Some people will merely be moved around within the housing while construction is happening. I think it's important to be clear on what that looks like. Mapping out emergency routes, as mentioned, to ensure that our police and fire could get, east and west in the city. We don't know what that disturbance will be like. I think understanding that, communicating to people, and adding this to the list, communicating to the citizen what that could look like when that viaduct starts to come down, what that disturbance may be, I think is very key to helping people at least get acclimated so that they can adjust. Last thing.
Thank you, Councilor Bey.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Cut you off there. I want to move on and ask an individualized question towards each of you. Mayor Walsh, we'll start with you. We're going to return to a topic that we discussed briefly earlier. The police department's budget of around $50 million makes up 1/5 of all city spending. The majority of that is in salaries and benefits for officers, who are far and away the city's highest paid employees. During arbitration on the Syracuse police contract, your administration cut $4 million in payments to officers from your original agreement and still got approval of the union. If Syracuse's officers were willing to take that much less, doesn't it signal that the city was offering police too much in bonuses and incentives in the first place? And why or why not?
I don't think so, Chris. We negotiated a contract that we felt would help us be competitive. I just heard yesterday that the Sheriff's Department has increased their salaries again, and we're already losing officers to the Sheriff's Department. So we understand that policing is an extremely difficult job, and our officers have options, and they're exercising those options. So we need to pay our officers a competitive wage. But again, that's why in addition to negotiating salary increases, we negotiated police residency. We negotiated incentives for speaking multiple languages, for furthering their education, so we could maximize the benefit. An arbitration process is not ideal. Everyone accepts less than what they want, but we were still able to keep the majority of our contract in place. And again, I'm still concerned from a pay scale perspective that we are going to continue to lose officers to other departments.
Thank you, Mayor Walsh. Councilor Bey, this next question will go to you. You've often talked about your experience in government during this campaign. You've been a city councilor for a decade. At the same time, you've been somewhat reluctant to offer many specifics on what you would do as mayor, saying you need to get inside City Hall, talk to department heads, and look under the hood to see what needs doing. Should voters be concerned that after 10 years in government, you still haven't presented a detailed policy agenda for the city's highest office?
No, they shouldn't be, because I believe a lot of that is propaganda, to be quite frank. In the time that I've been in office, I've written, arguably, the most legislation, certainly in recent years. Legislators are policymakers. We work with the administration, this one and the previous, oftentimes to determine how we would enforce many of the things that we legislate. I think to have the kind of experience I have, I made reference to the legislation I've written before that speaks to issues of people. And even if I talk in detail about, for example, how we could police neighborhoods, the things that we can do to ensure that we have improved community police relations, improved community police interaction, improving local residency, the position is still that I haven't provided enough detail. Certainly there's always a requirement to talk to the experts. Maybe there's an assumption that I'm not. A lot of the ideas that I communicate, especially as it relates to police, are coming from former chiefs. So there's certainly people in place who could help us roll out the details that I've communicated so far, whether we're talking about policing or other things, housing initiatives and the like. And so they should certainly trust me, and I believe they do.
Thank you, Councilor Bey. And Janet Burman, question for you. You've been vocal about the lack of support from the Republican Party in this race, your own party. You've received donations from not very many people and are largely self-funding this campaign. Should people be at all concerned that there seems to be somewhat of a lack of public support, especially from within your own party in this race?
Okay, I'm not sure I've been particularly vocal about lack of support from the Republican Party. I did make it clear that I was told that county executive and county chairman felt that it would be best if a Republican were not running in this race. Republicans in the city, however, are concerned about public safety and what they see happening, and they want someone to represent their interests in this race and put forward the types of policies that I have been presenting to the community. So I don't see that there's cause for concern on the part of voters as to where my support is coming from and how much it is. My message to make public safety the #1 priority in city government is one that has been embraced by people of all political persuasions.
Thank you each. That's going to wrap our question and answer portion of the debate. We're going to give you each 60 seconds for a closing statement. Don't want to cut you short here. We picked out of a hat to pick orders at the beginning of this. Councilor Bey, you will get the opportunity to go first.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Again, I want to express my appreciation to syracuse.com, the Post-Standard, the SI Newhouse School for having us for this discussion. This is a very important election. Obviously, every election is important. We always talk the importance of local elections because what we do in City Hall will affect you immediately. I've demonstrated, I believe, an understanding of what our issues are. I make the argument that persons coming out of the pandemic, what's on their mind primarily is the stability of their families, ensuring that people have employment security to take care of their families, increase safety so they can move to and fro throughout their neighborhoods without the threat of violence or even invasion into their personal spaces, public safety, reduction of unemployment, improved housing, neighborhood revitalization. These are the things that I want to focus on, things that everyday people are interested in, and I hope that you vote for me beginning on this Saturday, the 23rd through the 31st, and or on November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bey. Mayor Walsh.
Thank you, Chris. Again, appreciate you having this debate. We've been through so much over the past 4 years as a community. We lost far too many loved ones, but yet through all of it, we have continued to make progress as a city, and we've done it by working together, collaboratively. We can't go back to those years of divisiveness. Every day I've been in office, I've worked towards our vision of Syracuse being a growing city that embraces diversity and creates opportunity for all. And we are getting closer to that vision. I know there is so much work still to be done. The pandemic is not over. Far too many people in our community do not feel safe. And I will not be satisfied until everyone in this city feels safe and has a chance to succeed. It has been an incredible honor to be your mayor. I'm the only candidate with a proven track record and our plan to keep Syracuse rising, which you can find on my website, benwalshformayor.com. If you give me the opportunity to serve, I promise you I will never stop fighting to help our community continue to move forward and to help Syracuse keep rising. Please honor me with your vote on the Independence line beginning this Saturday through November 2nd.
Thank you, Mayor Walsh. And Janet Burman.
Thank you again for this opportunity. I am the Republican, Syracuse United, and Conservative Party's candidate for mayor in this election. Syracuse United is my campaign slogan, but it also represents my philosophy, and I did collect the signatures necessary for that designation on the ballot. So you will see it next to my name on the Republican line. Syracuse United, to me, represents an understanding that in order to adequately address the serious, seemingly intractable problems that exist in our community, we have to do it in a manner that recognizes that government alone is not going to solve all of these problems. I've made it clear that my first priority in government is going to be public safety. I think my demonstrated leadership in business, government, and in charitable organizations has shown how I can be an effective leader under these circumstances. And I look forward to the opportunity to finally make some progress on the concentrated poverty that our city has been plagued with for many years and has only gotten worse under this administration.
Thank you,
we want to
Janet
do
Burman.
better.
Thank you all. That's going to do it for us this evening. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us here tonight, and especially thank the candidates for taking the time to share their thoughts with voters. I'd also like to thank Syracuse University for being our host and our partner in this debate. For ongoing coverage of this election, please visit syracuse.com. We'd also like to ask you to consider subscribing to our print and online publications. Your subscriptions help make possible the good journalism that our reporters and editors and photographers do every day, including much of the work you've heard discussed here tonight. Finally, a reminder, early voting starts this Saturday, October 23rd at 10 a.m., and the election is Tuesday, November 2nd. In addition to the mayoral race, there are candidates running for seats on the Onondaga County Legislature, the City Council, the City School Board, several judicial seats, as well as local town and village positions. Thank you all for joining us here, and good night.